Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I would like to introduce our host, who is Debbie Dorsey. She is the Associate Professor of Health at Harford Community College. Debbie is a Maryland Distance Learning Association board member, Quality Matters peer reviewer, and the 2020 National Institute for Staff and Organizational Development Excellence Award recipient. That was really impressive. So Debbie, without further ado, if you would like to begin. And thank
I
you
know
everybody for joining.
I sound important, don't I?
Very much so, because you are.
People read that, and I think at any given time we suffer from imposter syndrome, right? And I'm like, yeah. So anyway, thank you for joining us. If you have done these webinar series with us before, you know it's about 30 minutes, and it typically in webinars I go over stuff you can use right now. But what we're going to start with this webinar is more just, okay, here's what's happening and here are some things to think about. And so you will leave with, takeaways, but we're not necessarily focusing on skills. Okay, so one of the things that I also will tell you is that once we get started and I start showing slides, I just hide myself, but you can see that I am, in fact, right now a real person. So let's see here. All right, did you stop seeing me?
No, we still see you.
You can still see me. Ah, there we go. Okay, now I'm invisible. All right, so everybody can see the first screen, hopefully.
Yes.
And if you can't, just say, no, I can't.
No, you're good.
So the first thing I was hoping for is for everybody that's here to tell me what kind of or what role you have at your institution. So are you faculty? Are you support staff? Are you an administrator? Or are you other? And if you're other, feel free to tell me who you are. All right, I got some faculty in here. Great. Isn't it funny? Like it's like A grade, F grade. So I've seen some dual roles in here as well. All right, so it looks like we got a mix here. And I know a lot of times people will serve more than one role at their institution. So the reason why I ask is that I just kind of like to know, and we'll get to a place in the slide, where are people coming from when they're talking about accessibility? So today, what we're going to do is talk about the main takeaways from the Department of Justice ruling. And then we're going to be asking the big questions. So how will institutions meet this deadline? And I think of this webinar as a way to just, I'm hopefully going to answer a lot of the questions that I've received to date. And then this is, a way to think more deeply about sort of these barriers what we can be up against when we're trying to make a massive change, which is what this is. So who? This is a question that I get asked. I think I saw Ron in here too, and that was actually, yeah, there he is. That was one of the questions that he had asked me. And so who does this apply to? And it's based on your county's population, not your institution enrollment. That's something that I think people get a little confused about. And so the rule is that if you live in a county that has more than 50,000 people, you're going to have to meet the 2026 deadline. And in Maryland, we have a few counties that won't apply, that they're smaller, but not very many. And so the majority of us are going to need to hit that 2026 deadline. And so, we want to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page and talk a little bit about the fundamentals, because what we're going to see here is that the big difference is that the ADA is now being very specific about how they define electronic accessibility. Prior to this, they were sort of, well, you should do this. Oh, here's a list of things that you could do. But right now, because they've switched to WCAG, they're being what I think you could say is more prescriptive. What do institutions need to do in order to meet those accessibility regulations? And so the WCAG is separated into four fundamentals. And the first is perceivable. With your faculty, with your people who generate forward-facing electronic information, this is the one that we tend to focus a bit more on skill building. What perceivable means is that a person can go in and identify what is what. So this is a document, this is an image, this is a video, regardless of whatever technology they're using to access your information. Whatever they're using, it should be able to perceive what you have put up there. Operable means that they can act on it. So this is a document, I can open the document. This is a web page, I can navigate to the web page. And again, it should be something that regardless of what kind of tech you use, you can get to that place. Understandable. So this is a tricky part here, and I always find this a little humorous. WCAG started off as guidelines for everybody, but particularly commercial websites. And so some of their fundamentals can be a little tricky to define in a higher ed space. So in higher ed, when we think about understandable, we're looking at more like navigation, the user experience in navigating. Do error messages come up when they're supposed to? Is there guidance for how to input something into a form or into an electronic document? But what it also speaks to is that it states language is easy to read and comprehend. Well, okay, let's take a big step back, right? Try to tell that to a STEM instructor. The language is going to be very specific to their subject matter. It's not going to be recognizable by all people. And so therefore, when we are thinking about higher ed, this part, I always say, and actually, if you're familiar with Quality Matters, they also have one of their standards says that there's no jargon. And that's very difficult when you're teaching physics or when you're teaching, those 300 and 400 level courses. And so I think what you can say for us in terms of making it easy to read and comprehend, that it's kind of subjective and that we're all just supposed to use our best judgment. So robust is the other fundamental. And what that means is no matter what happens, no matter how tech changes, you should still be able to access it. And so as AI changes, as virtual reality, and a lot of this is the interactives that, we'll put into our courses, they have to be able to, all of our students, they need to be able to access them as they evolve, as they update. And another thing that's new for this year is that we're now being very specific, mobile apps. Mobile apps have to meet accessibility standards as well. So again, what's new? We have to start meeting WCAG 2.1 AA. I'm going to differentiate between what these different AAA, what they mean. Some people will say, well, Debbie, isn't there a WCAG 2.2? Yes, it's just they've decided to do 2.1 for right now. So the big difference is A. In general, probably about most of us are hitting A maybe 60% of what we have up there. So that means that 40% is not even meeting anything. So A is the minimum, and ADA has said that is no longer okay. And so with A, we're talking, there's text alternatives. Well, we all know, right, that there is a lot of stuff out there on our web, on our LMS that does not have a text alternative. And A also means that there needs to be clear and consistent navigation. So not good enough anymore. So AA takes it up and says, all right, you got to have all that. Plus your videos need to be captioned. And my sort of observation on captioning is I think that this one has become a little bit more obvious to our faculty. And probably that is because the tools to make captions have vastly improved. over the last 5 years. Also, you need to be able to have a way to switch between dark mode and colorblind modes, and it must be operable with keyboard inputs. Now, again, we should have been doing this all along, right? But now we have to. Now we have to make sure. So AAA, very hard. I don't know who can hit it and keep it. Because you've got to have audio descriptions. So we're not just talking about captions of what the person's saying, but captions of what is happening in the background. And a lot of times we, as people who make video, we don't even have that tech. We don't have the ability to give those. But if you did, you could potentially be in the AAA. There can be absolutely no images of text. There probably shouldn't be anyway, but you just can't in AAA. So also it needs to have content sensitive help features. So we're not talking about a chat bot. We're talking about something where if a student is in an assignment tool, it right there at the place where they're at, it can help them with using that tool. And whereas chatbots, they kind of handle the overall general questions, this is different. There cannot be any re-authentication. And for most of us in higher ed, that takes us out right now of the AAA, because all of us who have tried to get into our clouds and our stuff know that we have to go through re-authentication 300 times a day, right? And so this just isn't going to happen for higher ed. And the reading level cannot be more than a grade 9, 10. Well, if you're at a community college, in general, grade 10 is the reading level that probably most of us try to get at. And so for this reason, even though, again, this is they're speaking more to commercial websites, most of us potentially are hitting that one anyway, but that might be the only one. So here's another big difference. It's the third parties. So in the past, the way that lawsuits typically ran was that if an institution adopted a textbook that was not accessible, the institution was the liable party and the textbook publishers had a little bit of security. Not anymore. Now, both parties are responsible for making sure that their content meets the regulations. And so everybody can get sued. Nobody's protected now. This also applies to your LMS native features. So for example, your tool submission, your discussion boards, just anything that lives within your LMS, it's native to it. And this also means that we're talking about third-party embedded in the LMS. So if you've used Microsoft 365 as an embed, if you've used SoftChalk, we do have SoftChalk at Harford, and it's a way to embed. You can take the student out of the LMS, but you can also embed those in. But again, it doesn't really matter now, whether it's in your course or it leaves the LMS. It needs to be meeting the regulations. Now, there are a good way to look at this is that it's anybody that your institution does business with. So if there is an exchange of money, then both parties need to make sure they're hitting the regulations. So this is your LMS, this is your course registration software, this is your cloud-based subscription. So Microsoft, in which Microsoft does a decent job with 365 with accessibility. They've come a long way. And of course, the publishers which we talked about. Now, here's the gray area. Websites whose primary purpose may not be to educate. Okay, so a lot of us as faculty, we probably use these. So it's a gray area, but hold that thought. Now, social media, this is a part that our non-LMS, our staff and our administrators also need to be aware of. This is our forward-facing web content, right? We're all on social media these days, and we're going to need to make certain that we are meeting those accessibility standards in our social media usage. And so one of the things I think is important to point out is, okay, we all have to be compliant by 2026. And what that means, and people will see this and go, oh, we're okay. is that anything that was before 2026 is exempt. Well, you're not going to get compliant in one day, right? It's not going to turn that magical day in 2026 and boom, all of a sudden, now all of your things need to be accessible. So you need to begin making that happen right now. In an ideal world, everybody would be there way before 2026. So here's what's kind of weird, in my opinion, is that the exempt, those who are the software and the electronic content that's exempt is the student's academic records and the report cards that live behind a secure online portal, which, yeah, they all do, right? We all have to follow FERPA. So it's kind of weird to me that we are not saying that information that is necessary for a student, right? A student wants to know how to log in and see their grades, but that this is exempt from meeting those regulations. I don't know how long it will last, and I don't know why it's exempt. I have suspicions, but that's exactly what they are, suspicions. So we're going to leave it at that. So here are some things that I call it the litmus test. So we've got number one, and that is if a student must understand your content in order to succeed in the course or at your institution, it needs to be accessible. Okay, so we're going to rewind back. That means that, okay, we can look at it as I have to meet the legal or I have to meet and it's hard for me to like put it this way, but the moral, ethical way is that we need to think about, all right, if it's the difference between a letter grade, if it's a difference between understanding material and not, it needs to be accessible. The other thing that you need to be thinking about is your culture, the culture that you create in your online courses, right? I always use cats as an example because a very good friend of mine who's faculty, she put cats up every which way, every place. So here's the thing. In the past, and even to today, one could argue that, well, whatever gets put up that's not specific to the course is, just for fun, can be marked as decorative. But what I would encourage you to think about is whether or not that is still providing an equal experience for all students, meaning you're a student in the course, there's a picture of a cat and it says decorative. Well, okay, you don't know then that faculty likes cats, right? So that might seem superfluous, but that means that that student is not getting a sense of who that instructor is in the way that another student who does not need alternative text does get. So that is something to consider because I think a lot of times we think about it just as learning content, but also thinking about what do you put in your course to create a sense of identity, to create certain culture, right? Those are things that you need to be thinking about. They need to be accessible as well. So remember, the student does not have to identify to you. So one of the things that I hear a lot from my faculty colleagues is, well, this really only applies to students who require accommodations. No. Legally, they do not have to identify themselves as using a screen reader or having a special need. They don't have to identify themselves, but you need to be compliant. So a good way to look at this is just assume that every student in your course, every student that accesses your website, they have special needs. It's a good way to just kind of think about it in your head. So got some tools that can help for now, because a lot of times going back to that, well, anything that leaves your LMS that is perhaps not considered to be an educational resource may or may not meet, but I am going to encourage you to not look at it that way. So there are two, but then of course the question becomes, well, how do I know, right? How do I know if this website is or is not accessible? So there are two tools that I use and they're working for now, because most of us know that Chrome extensions, they only work as well as they are kept up by their creator, right? And that's not always for an extended period of time, as well as bookmarklets. But Code Sniffer is a bookmarklet and Image Alt Text Viewer is an extension. And I'm going to show you what they look like now. So let's get out of here. All right. So this is something that I might use in my course. I teach nutrition, and it's from the agricultural library, and it's about tools, etc. So you can see up here, I've got my my plugin, the alt text viewer. I select that. And then it tells me, it looks at all of these pictures, right? And I can see whether it has alt text, and it does not. So here's an example of a .gov that's going to have to get with the picture pretty soon because they're not meeting the standards. But here, alt text scientist looking at a flask. That's various brightly colored vegetables. All right, so empty attribute here, right? They've got some, they don't have all. Now, the other thing that I will point out, so over here is my HTML code sniffer. Notice that when I select it, it doesn't work. And you'll see why. I'm going to show you one that does work. Not all websites allow code sniffer to sniff their code. So this is something that will work on some websites. It typically will not work on electronic PDFs that are up from a third source. But here's one that I might use for my holistic health course. And you can see here, let's do the alt text. It's not that bad. There's a few things in here, but watch what happens when I do HTML code sniffer on there. Oh my, it has 440 red zone errors. This is what this means. Errors, they're not great. To find a website that doesn't have any errors, it's impossible. Warnings mean you need to be aware of this. And notices are like, all right, this is something you could probably get away with it, but we think you should know about it. When you see 440 red zone errors, this is not a website that you want to be linking to. My rule of thumb is I look to see whether it has less than 15. In general, those red errors are going to be things like navigation, like, okay, maybe one jumps from here down to here, and that's not great, but probably the student will be moderately okay navigating that site. But when I see more than 15, that is not a good site. And what I have found is a lot of those websites that have published articles, like journal articles, like scientific experiments, and that sort of a study, they're not hitting accessibility. I mean, it is a hot mess. So you want to be careful. This is something that you as faculty can use, or you can share with faculty and people who create content that are not faculty. This is a very helpful tool. I'm always worried that HTML code sniffer is going to go away because I find it is very helpful in trying to decide whether or not you should use something. But again, when I try to run this here, it won't let me. This website blocks it. However, I have found that alt text it's pretty reliable for most websites. The only time I know for sure it does not work is if it's an electronic PDF. So those are some tools that you can use. Now, let's talk about who's going to be successful with this. First of all, it's the institution that understands the long view. All right. So there needs to be a culture shift. We need to start looking at this as something that is going to help our student, not something that's going to be we have to do it, right? A chore. So we need to start helping our people to see that this is good for everybody, right? We want to be positive about it. We also want to understand that depending on the role that the person serves, what motivates them is going to be different. So administrators, I love you. I was an administrator for a while myself. What motivates us is retention and completion and not getting sued, right? So when I talk to a group that's mostly administrators, that's what I'm going to focus on. That does not work for faculty. Faculty, if you say to them, you need to do this or your institution will be sued, in their mind, they think, well, that's my institution's responsibility, not mine. It almost creates like a reverse of what we want to have happen when we talk to faculty about the legal aspect of it. But what all faculty can get behind is it is a benefit for student learning. And so the one way that I use when I'm talking with faculty is to say, imagine that you're standing in the classroom and you're giving your lecture and you're talking about things, but you have identified one student who you will not allow them to see it. You block their view. And they say, well, that's preposterous, Debbie. I said, well, that is what's happening when you put up material in your course that is not accessible. You are blocking a student's ability to see your work. And a lot of times that then changes, like sort of a little light bulb goes off in their head. And they're like, okay, I'm starting to understand why this is important. Also, let's look at big picture. Your institution probably needs to retain a law firm that understands ADA. And I will say that based on my experience and what I have heard from other institutions, that's not happening. That this is that the retainers, the law firms that we're using, they really don't understand code. And so that's something to just be thinking about. Also, you want to start, if you're not already doing it, adopting the VPAT system for anything that you buy that is electronic, right? It makes electronic, or it's a cloud-based, some kind of software that you use. And if you're unfamiliar with what a VPAT is, it's a voluntary product accessibility template. And you can get it for free by the Information Technology Industry Council. If you go and Google it, boom, they'll show it to you. And essentially what this is anytime you're putting out a bid for software, you say to that particular vendor, you need to fill out this VPAT so I can make a decision about whether or not your product is going to meet the standards that I must meet. Also, this is the big one, money. For the 3 Ps, people, processes, and products. Important. This is where we get into a sticking point. I know we're coming up on the end, so I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit fast. I apologize. I'm going to talk a little quickly. But for products, we need something and people that automatically monitors anything that's created and that can take corrective action. Right now, institutions have put money into monitoring. That's what Ally is. But they have not so much put money into something that can correct. And so that's going to be an issue. You also need to have tech people who speak WCAG. If you want to look at WCAG 2.1, if you want to read it, it's wonderful. If you are not a coder, it will make you cry trying to understand it. But you need people at your institution who do understand it. You also need, and this is what I have to say, this will drive me crazy because I see it not happening, is you need to have beta testing before adoption. Do not bring a product in. Do not make your faculty use it. Do not make it create content unless you have seen how it works, because unfortunately, we do that a lot. And then we end up with a bad product. Also, last but not least, we need to be proactive, not reactive. This goes back to me saying, all right, the deadline is 2026, but you shouldn't wait that long. So we need to have a proactive approach to training every single person who makes electronic information, videos, images, text, our website, our LMS, all of that. We need to have a way to train our people on how to create that so that it becomes part of their process. But we also need to have a plan for maintaining skills and to onboard new people. So it's comprehensive. It's not reactive. You could argue that reactive is just throwing up something that teaches people, right? Proactive means you think about the entirety of going beyond 2026. All right, so I think, yes, I have hit my end. And we've got about 1 minute. I know we want to put up a slide for anyone who needs to take a picture of being here.
Yes.
And then I can stick around for questions if anybody has them too.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate your time for that very, very informative slides. And
Yeah.
many of us can use this a lot over and over again. So thank you very much. Hopefully you see my screen, that if you all need to take a screenshot to show that you attended today's session, please do. I'll also be putting in the chat a survey if you could take about today's webinar. But in the meantime, do any of you have any questions for Debbie?
I'm looking through the chat too.
No, very informative.
Yeah, I'm very thorough, aren't I?
No, what I'm really taking from your presentation, not only do we need the tech, but we need the people. That is key, and the culture shift. Because
Yes.
without the culture shift, we'll make the changes, but then they'll stop over time. People constantly add to everything, to courses, to documents, everything. So you need that culture shift for sure.
Yep, you're exactly right. All right, other questions at all?
Can I just add,
Yeah,
part of
please.
that culture shift is moving toward continuous improvement. So people know that it's not just, oh, I did all 10 things on a checklist. I'm out. 2026, I made it. And then you're just done.
Yes,
Exactly.
you're exactly right. And that speaks to also, we got to meet robust, right? We have to meet that criteria that as we evolve, as we change, it's got to meet it still, I think the biggest challenge is the interactives. Those are tricky. There are ways to make them accessible, but the issue is that a lot of times we have to go back and retrofit them rather than make them that way from the get-go. And people are coming out with tech degrees that they haven't taken accessibility. And so hopefully that's changing. There's acknowledgement in the industry that that's a problem, but I think that's probably going to be one of the greater challenges. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And thank you all for attending.